Thank you. LAO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Kenneth Capon with the LAO. We recommend adopting this proposal. I think the administration gave a good background, so we'll bypass the background for this. Basically, we think the most compelling argument for adopting this proposal is to take advantage of the existing local oversight expertise. Some charter schools have very specialized academic programs that can bring unique oversight challenges. Overseeing a charter school that specializes in performing arts may be very different than overseeing a charter school that serves students who formerly dropped out of school. Approving this proposal would let the State Board of Education take advantage of this expertise, even if the authorizer happens to be in a different county than the one where the charter school is located. We would also note that in some counties, there are very few LEAs, and so the options for oversight are rather limited in those counties. And as the number of charter schools, if it continues to grow at the pace it's been growing, we think there'll be more and more reason to give the State Board options in regards to the performance of that oversight function. So for those two reasons, we'd recommend adopting this proposal.
Thank you. Department of Education.
Monique Ramos on behalf of the Department of Education. Our position is the board already has authority to delegate this to the county where the LEA is authorized from, and we just don't see the need for the proposal given their current authority.
In response, Finance?
Sure. We think that there certainly is some benefit to allowing other counties or other school districts to provide that oversight function. We think that there are certainly counties out there that and LEAs in some counties that aren't in the position to provide this type of oversight. For example, you may have a very rural county versus a county in, say, Los Angeles County that has significant expertise in overseeing a variety of charter schools. So we think there's some benefit in providing that flexibility to the board.
Okay. Questions from the committee? Yes, Mr. Nastanski.
Just a minor point. I don't know if she said you already have the authority.
They have the authority within the county in which it's authorized. So if
you're going to allow other counties, you don't have the authority to do that now. Got it.
Correct.
Thank you.
All right. I believe that as indicated in the budget analysis, it's the staff opinion that this is largely, again, a policy proposal with little budgetary impact. We will, however, we will hold this issue open to further address whether this should be addressed through the policy process or the budget process. So this is an opportunity for any further questions on the subject item. Unless there are any further questions, we will move on. Yes, comments. Thank you, Mr. Chavez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, Moira Top on behalf of the California Charter Schools Association. We do support the item. Just to be clear, as was noted, currently the board can delegate to counties, but because we're talking about a fairly small subset of charter schools, you don't have economies of scale that have developed in certain counties. And what this would do is it would enable the state board to find perhaps regional hubs and regional centers that can cross county lines and really develop expertise in oversight. And from our perspective, this proposal is entirely fiscal. The reality is our schools are being charged oversight fees. And as your analysis indicates, these fees then are being diverted to other purposes within the department. We strongly support active oversight by government and by state oversight entities. And we think that diverting those dollars reduces the oversight you have of charter schools. Having poorly performing charter schools hurts everyone. It hurts the good schools, and it certainly hurts the children who are in those schools. So we want active, participatory oversight, and we don't think diverting dollars away from oversight is a good thing for the school system. We think this is one tool. It's not a mandate. It provides flexibility for the state board to provide that oversight, and we think it's appropriate. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Lucia with Ed Voice. Similar to the issues that were just raised, we think it's very important that the department exercise its oversight responsibility appropriately, and when it can't handle that with regard to capacity, that it finds other chartering authorities so that oversight actually does exist. We want to point out a very serious issue that's in print that we believe needs to be resolved, and it's appropriate for this committee to do so in its investigatory and oversight function over the executive branch, and that is that if it is indeed true under the analysis in your agenda that the department has indicated in writing, if they've indicated in writing and they're actually doing so in terms of diverting oversight fees to other uses, then they're explicitly violating 47613 subdivision C of the Education Code and charging excessive fees to the schools in which they're exercising oversight over, and that's illegal, and that needs to be remedied immediately.
Eric Premack, Charter Schools Development Center. We support the governor's proposal as well. The current staff in the department are doing, I think, a pretty good job of handling this responsibility. Ms. Russell, who oversees that, has done a good job of bringing staff together to do it. But in the none too recent past, there have been times where, due to severe staffing turnover and other issues, that there have been some very serious gaps, if you will, in terms of the staffing capacity of the department to handle this. I anticipate that this may wax and wane in the future, and because of that, we think it's extremely important for the State Board to have this kind of flexibility going forward, and so we support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Nistandi.
That's kind of a serious charge about diverting funds. What's going on with the department?
So it appears that we may have provided some misinformation at the hearing, and I'm going to have Julie Russell speak to how funds are being provided, and that's how it ended up in the analysis.
Julie Russell. I'm the Director of Charter Schools at the California Department of Education. So we do receive 1% of funds for oversight, and it is for providing oversight to those schools that the State Board directly has the authority, they're the authorizer for. So we have 19 schools, and then there's 8 district-wide charter schools that we provide services. This is ongoing communication with each of those schools, providing technical assistance through the transition for the new accountability and assessment system, the LCAP, that kind of information. We also do the annual site visit. We receive expenditure reports and budgets that we do the review. So we very much use that money to provide the oversight services for those schools. We have very limited resources in the charter division. We are also responsible for any appeals for local schools to the State Board. So what we do is we split fund staff to better utilize and make more effective the funds that we do have available. So we can have more staff providing that type of expertise, but in different, pockets of time. So we also have federal grant funds. So as an example, if a State Board school receives the federal grant, we would use that staff and pay them using the federal funds to go out and do the site visit, because we're doing the site visit for the federal funds. So it's best using the time and resources that we have, but it's not diverting the 1% and using it for a different use.
Well, it sounds fairly convoluted, what you're doing, but so these folks that are on the ground dealing with that, they seem to think that they are being diverted. Why do you think there's this disconnect then?
I think the disconnect was some information that we provided to the committee in pre-hearing and some conversations, and I believe that the comments were related to that part of the analysis, that it was the information that the department provided that they're reacting to.
Mr. Chair, I'll leave that up to you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? I mean, for the Department of Education, the point seems to be reasonable. That I know that often we hear that the Department of Education is overwhelmed with all of the demands being placed on it. I mean, and I agree with the point that that having bad charter schools with inadequate oversight doesn't do anyone any good, especially the kids. Why not delegate it to, as the governor's office is proposing?
I think our concern is that it's more of a policy statement that the board has had this authority and it's chose never to use it prior. So it's an observation as to why they have not chose to use it when they've had that authority. So that's our position at this time.
Okay. We will hold this open for further consideration. Moving on then to issue number 5. The governor's 2014-2015 budget proposal as it relates to state special schools and their deferred maintenance needs. I'd like to start with Department of Finance.
Good morning. Lisa Mrzinski with the Department of Finance. I think it's still morning anyway.
Yes.
I'm going to provide you with just a brief overview of state special schools and then more specifically the deferred maintenance proposal that's included in the governor's budget. So the state special schools consist of 2 schools for the deaf, one in Riverside and one in Fremont, 1 school for the blind in Fremont, and 3 regional, sorry, I lost my thoughts, diagnostic centers. They are funded and operate underneath the Department of Education, and they have a combined funding of non-Proposition 98 General Fund, Proposition 98 General Fund, federal funds, and then reimbursements from local school districts that have students at the facilities. So they receive in the 14-15 budget about $95 million general fund. That's $51 million Proposition 98 and $44 million of non-98 general fund. And generally every year the state special schools set aside $2 to $2.5 million annually for deferred maintenance and maintenance projects at their facilities. So in 2012-13, there was an ongoing funding cut to the state special schools of $1.8 million general fund. This was supposed to be an unallocated reduction, but language kind of directed it to the maximum extent possible to go towards this set aside for deferred maintenance. Out of the past 2 years, this has been backfilled with available federal fund carryovers. So the state special schools haven't really seen that reduction. However, the 14-15 governor's budget does not provide any backfill for this amount. The governor's budget does, however, include a proposal of $100 million statewide for outstanding deferred maintenance projects across the state. Of this amount, $5 million is proposed to go towards the state special schools to handle their deferred maintenance projects. They've identified a list about $25 million outstanding projects, $25 million in outstanding projects. So under the governor's proposal, the state special schools provide the Department of Finance with this $5 million list. We then analyze it, review it, and approve it, and then would provide that list to the JBLC. I did that, JLBC, I apologize. About 30 days prior to allocating the funding. So they would have 2 years to expend or encumber these funds for these projects. So I just would like to point out that this is really not intended to serve as a backfill for the previous cuts. This is really more a statewide priority to pay down longstanding debt and outstanding obligations for the administration. So with that, if you have any questions.
All right. Before we open up for questions, let's hear from the LAO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, Rachel Ehlers with the LAO. Our recommendation on this item is to provide $3.6 million instead of the $5 million that the governor has proposed. This would essentially sustain the existing practices that the department has for maintaining the schools, but not provide the additional augmentation. As Department of Finance noted, they were cut by $1.8 million a couple of years ago. It's been steadily backfilled for the past 2 years. This 3.6 would essentially continue this backfilling process for 2 more years, the budget year plus 1, and not provide an additional augmentation on top of that. We have a couple of reasons for this recommendation. One is that we actually think the department should be commended for their budgeting practices for deferred maintenance. Our office put out a report a couple of weeks ago that looked at maintenance practices across all of the education segments, K-12 schools, the state special schools, UC, CSU,
and community colleges. And we actually thought that this was the practices by CDE for the state special schools was one of the more well-run maintenance practices across all the segments. They were able to provide a lot of data. They have a clear process for prioritizing projects, and they have been annually setting aside money not only to maintain the facilities, but to begin chipping away at the backlog for deferred maintenance. So because we think that their ongoing practices will begin to address the backlog, we don't think that this is the highest priority for non-98 general fund additional investments. Also, in looking at their list for this funding, not all of them were urgent health and safety needs that would require this additional investment. And then beyond that, we have some long-standing concerns with the way the state has approached funding the state special schools, that the mix of non-Prop 98 with Prop 98, how much federal funding is involved, how much local contributions school districts make when they send students there, how do we fund services for blind and deaf students at these schools as compared to services for blind and deaf students who choose to stay in their local schools and not go to residential schools. So we think the whole state's approach to funding the state special schools needs a more in-depth look before we begin to make additional investments at this time.
Thank you. And last but not least, the Department of Education.
Monique Ramos on behalf of the Department of Education. So the state schools distinguish between three types of maintenance: ongoing maintenance, critical repair, and deferred maintenance. Ongoing maintenance is performed by school employees during regular business hours. Critical maintenance is a scope of maintenance that goes beyond the school employee's ability and is accomplished generally for operational and safety purposes. And then deferred maintenance is those critical maintenance projects that were unable to be accomplished, usually due to lack of funds. So this one-time funding, the state special schools are proposing to repair water damage to walls from leaky showers, repair and replace sidewalks. There are several aging and deteriorating roof projects that need to be done. There's a failing emergency communication system that needs to be replaced, asbestos and lead abatement, and accessibility corrections. While the department is appreciative of the one-time funding from the Department of Finance, we do see the need to replace those ongoing dollars to both deal with our critical maintenance projects as well as chip away at the deferred maintenance backlog.
So, I'm sorry, the Department of Education is supporting the governor's
We would support it, but we do see the need for ongoing dollars.
Yes, okay. All right, any questions from the committee? Mr. Jabobny.
I have two quick questions. One for the Department of Finance. Does the administration have a long-term plan for the $25 million deferred maintenance projects for the special schools? And then before you answer, I'd just like to ask, you've asked that you support the project for the other $1.4 million. What type of projects would that go into, building? How would this help the students?
So there's a list of projects that ones that I just mentioned, but in addition, they'd be working on fixing floors. There's deteriorating underground utility lines and aging mechanical systems. So part of our larger list, which we can provide the committee, we have provided the committee, but can provide individual members.
So LAO said that $1.4 million wouldn't be used for projects for health and safety. You would counter that and say that if that $1.4 million wasn't available, that projects that would affect students' health and safety would be compromised or not be able to be upgraded or fixed.
I think that they are. Well, I'm actually going to let Scott Kirby speak to this. He's the.
I think it's safe to it's safe to assume that 1.4 would be carried to maintain the safety of the campus for the students because of the low incidence disabilities that are prevalent across the campuses that are blind, deaf, deafblind. Accessibility to buildings and sidewalks is critical. So as Ms. Ramos mentioned before, we do have accessibility issues across the campuses for our deaf and blind students that do need attention.
Right, Mr. Ernestani.
Hi.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
That's okay. So we do not currently have a plan in place to address the $25 million identified, but we're continuing to look at resources available and competing priorities. But paying down the debt, I mean, this has been said numerous times as an administration, and these outstanding obligations are a priority of the administration. So as funding becomes available, I'm sure payments will be made towards this.
Mr. Dubovny, just to follow up, in reviewing the department's list, some of them certainly are health and safety, but some of them include things like painting interior classrooms and replacing carpets and things that we would deem not the highest priority for the state right now.
Mr. Nistani.
Thank you. I just want to comment, first of all, that I think it's one of the healthiest things I see here in our process in this bureaucracy is the fact that the LAO gets into minutia of $3.6 to $5 million. That shows a good check and balance, and I really do appreciate that, having that back and forth. It helps, I think, all of us quite a bit. On your point, though, of I thought you said I get what you just said, some of it's not health and safety, maybe painting the classroom, but also you're concerned about the larger issue of how you fund special needs schools or special schools. Now, isn't that a separate process from this budget item, or why would you withhold it just because of that?
It is a separate process, but I think the point we're trying to make is we should sustain existing processes for the next 2 years. They're doing a good job. They're starting to chip away. Before we make additional investments and commitments, let's take a more holistic look at the state structure, at the state's funding, before we make additional investments into them right now.
That's a good point. So why, so before you pour money into the existing stream that it's not for health and safety, is there a point in time we're going to look at that point, I guess, of are we going to look at a different way to structure funding?
I think it's on our list to look into, and I think the administration's also indicated it's something.
It's also something that we're interested in looking into as well.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Well, we appreciate the information from the LAO, but given that the overall stated deferred maintenance need for our state special schools totals in excess of $25 million, or at least $25 million, and given that we do have this one-time funding opportunity here with the proposal from the Governor's Office and the concurrence from the Department of Education, I would recommend and entertain a motion to approve the Governor's proposal as budgeted. Motion's been made and seconded. Roll call, please.
Mr. Marsucci?
Aye.
Chavez? Dubovny?
Aye.
Estande? Ting?
Aye.
Thank you. Moving on to issue number 6, then, the Governor's budget proposal to shift $211 million in remaining school facility program bond authority to the new construction and modernization programs. Also, the Governor's proposal to dedicate monies for the emergency repair program. This will be informational, as the recommendation would be to hold this item open. Department of Finance.
So the 14-15 budget summary is a continuation of last year's budget summary, and that we're trying to evaluate what the administration's current role is in funding school facilities. With that, we have 2 proposals. One is to dedicate $188 million towards the emergency repair program, and to transfer remaining bond authority in the specialized programs into the core programs of new construction and modernization. The funding amounts identified in Governor's budget was about $211 million, but we recall that that's actually a point in time. So the funds will adjust accordingly as bond funds return back into the programs and then leave.
Okay. LAO.
Paul Gozuski with the LAO. On the first proposal regarding the shift of bond authority, we generally agree with the Governor's concern that the 2 main programs in the school facilities program, which are new construction and modernization, have no more bond authority remaining, and yet there are a large number of districts that have submitted applications for which there's not funding. Meanwhile, there's a couple of other specialized programs that still have remaining bond authority. So we agree with the general idea to target the resources where they're most needed. We do have a concern, though, that there are some pending applications for the specialized programs. There is some demand there, but there are certain administrative hurdles that have to be overcome for the bond authority to actually be used that prevents it going out. So we were recommending just delaying the transfer of the bond authority by 6 months. Their proposal would take effect July 1st, and we're saying just wait another 6 months, so maybe some of these applications could be processed in the meantime. In addition, the governor had excluded one specialized program from the transfer of bond authority, and that was the school facility program for charter schools. And we didn't see a rationale for excluding that particular program if all of the other specialized programs' bond authority was going to be shifted. So we would recommend including that. On the emergency repair program, to give you a little bit of background on this program, it started back in 2004, 2005. There was a lawsuit against the state involving a number of issues, including inadequate school facilities at certain low-performing schools. And the state agreed at that time to provide $800 million to make emergency repairs at certain low-performing schools. And over the course of a couple years, the state provided some of the funding, about $388 million, but has not provided any money for this program since 2008. All of the applications for the program that are outstanding date back to 2008. So at that time, districts submitted an application for funding, and there hasn't been money. Since the program is for emergency repairs, we believe in most cases the repairs have been made over the past 6 years, since these are things like broken plumbing, broken heating and air conditioning systems. We don't have data on this, but we do believe that given their emergencies, districts likely went ahead and did it, even though the state hadn't provided any money. We think that there's a couple of different perspectives that the legislature could consider here, and it depends on what your goals and priorities are in terms of how you want to proceed. The first option would be to approve the governor's proposal, and that would really honor the commitment you made many years ago to pay these districts who are waiting for money. We believe they have probably completed their projects, so if you provide them money today, you're not necessarily fixing school facilities today at those districts. They may use the money for any other purpose they choose. But you would be honoring that commitment that you made many years ago to provide funding for that purpose. However, if your concern is to actually fix school facilities today, to make emergency repairs today, you may want to take a different approach in which you might want to require that districts submit new applications to find out what are the needs today, not the needs 6 years ago, and then target funding towards that. That would be a second approach you could take. And a third approach, if your priority is streamlining education funding, which you discussed a lot last year and took actions last year, the emergency repair program is essentially a categorical program. And the state eliminated most categorical programs last year when it created the LCFF. It eliminated a program for deferred maintenance. So it's gotten rid of most of these specialized maintenance-related programs. So a third approach you could take is you could say, as part of the LCFF, as part of the additional money that you're providing all districts to do maintenance as part of the LCFF, that should be used to pay for emergency repairs as well. So those are three different options that we'd present you with, and it depends on what your priorities are.
All right, thank you. And Department of Education.